Welcome back to The Sensitivity Doctor. This is your host, Dr. Amelia Kelley. Today, I had licensed neuropsychotherapist and author Britt Frank. Guys, I was so excited to have her on the show. She is brilliant and hilarious and such a compassionate and amazing therapist who wrote a really awesome book, The Science of Being Stuck. In this book, she really helps break down fear and self-doubt cycles that we get ourselves in. She also is an award-winning instructor, holds a degree from Duke, right around me. And her latest book coming out, Align Your Mind, is actually going to be coming out in May. I'm going to have her come back and talk about internal family systems, IFS parts work, which is really cool. But in this episode, I did not expect us to take the turn we did. We started to talk about how grief is a huge part of stuck cycles, how being stuck is not necessarily a bad thing, but a message, and little micro movements and things you can do to help yourself get unstuck. So I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Enjoy. So I am so honored that you came to talk to me because I was checking out some of the talks you've done and the podcasts you've been on and just what you've written about. And it just so resonated. And I love how you talk about it too, because you're not only relatable, but you're quite funny. And I super appreciate that. So
the trauma made me funny.
Oh God. Well, yeah, so that makes sense. So could you help me and people listening understand what got you into this work and a little bit about what it means to you to be stuck? Because I think you have a very different take on it than a lot of people do, which I think is really awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, so I, like a lot of people, came to this work by being a hot train wreck mess of a human, just trying to figure out life. And I was a drug addict, eating disorders. I had trichotillomania, which is hair pulling. It's hair pulling derivative of OCD, and lots. I had a very long list of diagnoses, and I really just thought it was me, that nobody else struggled, that I was just sent out of the human factory missing some software and a few pieces. And then when I came to the work through a therapist who practices the type of therapy that I'm not trained in, it was like, are you kidding me? Life's not easy, and change is not simple, or change is not easy, but it is simple. The tools of change are not complicated. And I was so pissed off when I learned it wasn't rocket science, and I can change, and you can
why
change.
Did I waste all this time?
And money and all the things. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So then I became a therapist in my mid-30s. I did not pop out of school fully functional as an adult human professional therapist person. That took a minute.
So can I ask you, what is the therapy that you were saying that you're trained in that was helpful?
Yeah, the two modalities that are my specialties, I guess, is somatic experiencing, which is a body-based therapy that focuses on the central nervous system, which is bananas that most therapists are not trained in that, but okay. And then the other one is internal family systems, which focuses on the multiplicity of all of our minds. Part of me feels this way, part of me feels that way. They're beautiful models, and I love them so much.
I'm obsessed with both of them. And so I feel like somatic experiencing is such an enigma because there's so many ways to do it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know, but I actually had Peter Levine on here.
No, you didn't. He's like the Wizard
girl.
of Oz to me. Does he really exist? Is he real?
He does. He really, really exists. And he was wonderful. So I'll send you the episode. It was a while back.
Please do. Yeah.
So when you were in this work, in your own inner work, what was it about the idea of stuckness that came out to you?
I am a big advocate of information needs to be shared, and we all need access to resources. And often what we call mental health problems are systemic ones, not personal ones. But the word stuck resonated with me because it depathologizes our humanity. I don't have to lead with, here are my disorders and here's my specific neurodivergent things that I want to come out with. Whatever your thing is, even if you don't have trauma, which I would question, but let's say you don't have major trauma, fine.
Okay.
Or you don't have a mental illness, fine. We all get stuck. Everybody with a pulse gets stuck. And I found that, and I'm really big on depathologizing our experience and then declinicalizing our language. So stuck seems like that fits the bill.
I love that so much, and I can relate to it personally. And I can also, it's funny, I can relate to it personally as a therapist too, because I feel like sometimes I feel stuck with my clients who feel stuck. Do you know what I mean?
It's so well, if you want to get down a clinical rabbit hole, when I feel
Go for
stuck
it.
with a client, it's, kind of using the countertransference, like, oh, the state of stuck that I'm feeling with them is in fact how they are feeling about their current dilemma. So my therapeutic stuckness might be I'm resonating with their stuckness in a beautiful transference, countertransference kind of situation. But it's hard if you don't know whose feelings are whose.
True, true. And if I'm feeling so stuck, can I still help you?
Yeah. And again, sometimes the tool with stuckness isn't movement or action. Sometimes, not often, not always, but sometimes the tool for stuckness, especially therapeutically, is resonance. Will you sit
Okay.
with me in my stuckness? I'm going nowhere. I have no drive. I have no gas in my tank, but will you sit with me in the stuckness until it shifts? It's very Jungian, like to hold the tension of
Yeah,
the stuckness until a third path appears.
right. So how could you apply that to someone personally? Maybe they're not a therapist working with a client, but they're feeling like they know what they want to do. And you know what? Now I'm realizing how much parts work would play a role in this, because you could have the part of you that feels super stuck, and then you could have the part of you that generates all the ideas and is like frustrated with the stuck part.
Which is then a polarization, right? I
Right.
have a part who knows what to do, and I have a part who's saying, no, shut the system down. We're not doing anything. And if you
Right.
align with either side of a polarity, you're going to lose. So, yay, internal family system. So, how I approach stuckness clinically, if I were doing a therapist training, is a lot different than the type of stuckness that I speak about in my work. But I never get to talk clinical shop. So, I'm
Do it.
happy to do this with you any day.
Yeah.
When I'm working with people, the main thing with stuckness is one, not asking why. And I'm sure you can appreciate doing therapeutic work. The why is the question, right? Everyone wants to know,
Right.
why did they do that? Why didn't they
Right.
do that? Why can't I stop the thing? Why can't I start the thing? And why is the number one question that will keep you stuck. Why, if you were running a marathon, is a mile 10 problem, not a mile 1 problem. We don't need to know why a building's on fire to get out. We don't need to
Good
know
point.
why our car ran out of gas to know we have to fill it. And so, why am I stuck will keep you stuck. Even if you answer it, you're still stuck. And so, rather than why, a better question is, what am I willing to do right now? I call them micro yeses. What is the smallest
Oh,
possible, most microscopic thing you can say yes to right now?
right.
And that will then build momentum.
I am obsessed with that. That
I
makes a
love it.
lot of sense. It
It's so
really
stupid.
does.
It's simple. Like really, my whole career has now boiled down to like a micro yes for a fitness goal isn't take a walk around the block, and it's not even unroll the yoga mat. A micro yes for a fitness goal is if you're sitting on your couch scrolling and
Yeah.
doom scrolling, take off your left sneaker and throw it by the door, and that's it. That's all you do today. And then tomorrow you take off both sneakers and you throw them by the door. And people will say, "Well, that's silly. How am I supposed to do anything if I'm doing things that small?" The
Right.
answer is steps that small prevent you from going into amygdala overload and shutdown. So it interrupts the pattern. And if you can interrupt the pattern, you can change the habit. But it has to be that
Right.
small in order to do that.
Right. Because feeling even like a microscopic accomplishment, right, is powerful.
Versus, why can't I just take a 5 minute walk? What's wrong with me? Then we have shame, and then we have cortisol, and then we have more shutdown. So the micro yeses bypass that whole mess of stuckness.
So you're bringing up a couple brain things. So I think it would be helpful for sure if you could help people who don't know anything about this understand what is happening to my nervous system when I feel stuck and what
Mm-hmm.
is happening when I am even microscopically moving forward.
Yes, I love that question. I love brain things.
Me too.
It's so fun, right? So you can think of your brain like a company with different teams. And like any company, each team has different responsibilities and different roles. And sometimes they are at odds with each other. And so our best logic and reasoning and our creativity and our big plans, that's all the executive team. But the executive team is not always in charge. I tell people, imagine if everybody leaves the building and then all of the sprinklers go off. You're going to need an emergency crew to come in and do some emergency work. And what happens is our emergency team, I call it the safety team, when your safety team thinks there's a problem, it's going to usher everybody out of the building and it's going to come in and just shut everything down. And that's fight, flight, or freeze. And the problem is people will say, well, why are my executives fleeing the scene? There's no problem. And it's, well, your brain's been keeping you alive longer than you've been conscious. So longer than we've had consciousness. Our brains have been keeping humans alive forever. So maybe your brain has a different language it speaks and we need to learn it, because we can fight it with logic, but logic versus safety will win every time.
That's a good point. And when we're in that safety space, the logic space really isn't quite as important because we don't need to do algebra when we're fighting a tiger.
And we don't need to be asking why when we're stuck with procrastination, even though that seems weird. It's like, but wait, procrastination, there's no threat, there's no tiger. And just because you can't see the tiger doesn't mean your brain is not perceiving one. And so I always default to my brain is on my side. I don't like what it's doing, but I can't just assume that's why I really don't like the language of war. Anxiety doesn't attack us. It feels like an attack because it seems to come out of nowhere and it feels horrible. I've had it my whole life. I get it. But anxiety does not attack us. And so we don't need to banish the inner critic. We don't need to fight anxiety. Nothing is out to get us. It's our brain trying to keep us alive.
You know, something you're saying is making me think of a common behavior I see with ADHD that I see it both in my home with my husband and I also see it with my clients. And it is, there's almost a stuck pattern in preparation when trying to execute something. And it almost feels like this hyper focus on the why in a weird way. Like, why is this not going to work? What are all the potential ways that this is not going to be executed? So I need to read watching my husband read the instructions on something is like watching someone study for the SATs. Like, I don't care what he's doing. It takes forever. And I'm just like, just do it. So can you speak on that? Because I'm wondering if there's some connection here.
Yeah, and I'm not an ADHD expert and I'm not a doctor, but as someone who has a variety of neurodivergent types of things, that there's a lot of overlap between CPTSD and ADHD and OCD and autism. So it's like, well, which thing is which? I will default to, I don't know, figure out what the tools are for each one and try them. And whichever one works, awesome. When you're stuck on a rumination loop, and I get stuck on loops all the time, it's how do we break the pattern? It's not why is the pattern there? It's it's am I invested in breaking the pattern? My husband is a researcher. Like, no matter what it is, whether it's a big thing, like where are we going to live, or a little thing like which type of milk are we going to get at the grocery store, is we have to do all of the research. And it works for him. And he has no interest in not doing that. So first is how important is it to you that this pattern break? Some people don't care. And then the second one is you interrupt patterns by different behavioral interventions, not by trying to think your way out of it. So something as simple as if you're on your computer and you're stuck on a Reddit rabbit hole researching whatever your thing is, literally just lifting your laptop up and down 3 times. That can be enough to at least jolt your brain out of autopilot, because whether you're on an ADHD spiral or a hyper overfocus or a lack of focus, either way, that is a loop of a pattern. And in order to break the patterns, I call it snow globing your brain. You can bite into a lemon. You can all of a sudden turn left 5 times or start dancing. Anything that breaks your brain's anticipation of pattern is going to create a little tiny window where you might be able to make a different choice.
I love that so much. And my mind is pinging to all these different things that not even just like the idea of stuck, but when we're maybe necessarily doing something, and I guess you would be stuck on it, that is unhelpful for what you want to accomplish. Or I'm even honestly thinking of I guess he's not a toddler anymore, but my young child. I'm like, when did they not be a toddler? Like, when did they fall out of that? But where if he's in, like an emotion spiral, that oftentimes the only thing that stops it is not talking to him about it, is not reasoning with him about it, but it's a complete like left turn to something different, or just, we call it a distraction, but I think what you're saying is that it's maybe something different.
Pattern interruption.
Pattern
And
interruption.
that works. When I did play therapy for years, when kids would have big feelings, I never did the, oh, they're there, you're safe. No, if they're having a big feeling, I match it. When they're like, I hate school, I would say, oh my God, you hate school so much. And in somatic work, the task is not soothe it, it's make it bigger so it can metabolize through your system. That's not going to work with everything in every case, in every situation. But often it's counterintuitive to think, no, we don't want to soothe the thing. We want to make it big enough that it can then shift naturally. But if it can't shift naturally, interrupting it with distractions or really aggressive sensory stimuli like lemons, those things can work.
It almost feels like you're saying that with stuckness, like if you feel like stuck on something, or, there's a pattern in your life that's not working for you, that, okay, you could get really, really big, or at the very least you could accept it.
Yeah, again, it's really hard to sustainably change a pattern without first accepting it. And then it's, well, if I'm accepting it, am I just giving up? And I'll use my drug addiction as an example.
Okay.
It's like me saying I accept that this is where I'm at right now is not me justifying the behavior or saying this is a good thing. And everyone should just enable me and accommodate my stuff because I accept myself. No, it's I accept that this is where I am right now. Whether or not I like it is another issue. But if I don't at least start with acceptance, then how am I supposed to cope with the reality of it and then own it and then make different choices? It's tricky. But like the sensory pattern interruption, that doesn't work with stuckness. Like, I'm in a bad relationship. How do I get out? Biting into a lemon, do it all day. I've been there. It doesn't work. So that type of stuckness might be we're so focused on stay or go that we're missing all of the things that might be more helpful, such as if I'm stuck in a relationship where my partner is the breadwinner, I need to know how much money it takes for me to live without them. And so then it's not do I stay or do I go? It's how do I get financial guidance so I know what I need, so I know what kind of job I might need to get, and then what type of skills I might need to up level. And so, but stuckness I've never seen in my entire clinical career. Stuckness is not a moral failing or a character flaw. There's almost always an environmental stressor, or at the very least, a genetic function or something that can be changed to the degree we have safety and resources.
Do you ever feel, and I'm glad you brought up the relationship piece too, because it does feel like we can point to something like whether or not you want to start a habit versus whether or not you want to completely shift and uproot not just your life, but the way you believe you function, your identity. I mean, ending a relationship can shift virtually everything for a short period of time until you readjust.
Right.
So I'm happy you validated that lemons will not help us get out of abusive relationships.
Been there, done that. I've been in domestically violent situations. There's not enough citrus on the planet that will move the needle on that. That's a different set of stuckness tools.
No, but I like what you're saying too, because in the effort of getting unstuck with like one pervasive pattern of, it kind of makes me think of people have different opinions on the law of pure potentiality, or not that, but law of attraction. That's what it is. I get it. There's different ideals around that. But I did love this one idea that when you focus on the problem, you're going to continue to focus on the problem, right? So you're less likely to think of solutions. So a metaphor that I give for that is riding a bike. If you're on a bike, you're on a greenway, and I say, okay, ride the bike straight, stay on the path, but I want you to look at the trees. Like, don't hit the tree, look at the trees, but ride straight.
Yeah.
You can't. I mean, your bike is going to veer towards the trees. And I feel like sometimes when we focus on like not wanting to hit the thing or not wanting to get hurt, we miss out on like actually focusing on the thing that's going to keep us moving forward.
Yes, I love that analogy. And I love it because it's not clinical and pathological. It's like, duh, everyone who's ridden a bike knows what that feels like. I actually am a big law of attraction fan because there's neuroscience to back it up. There's a new book out about the neuroscience behind it. And really simply put, it's the law of attraction is just using confirmation bias on our own behalf. It's
what is the name of the book? I'm so curious.
It's by Dr. James Doty, I think.
Okay.
I can't remember.
I'm writing it down.
It's so good. And it's kind of like when you buy a house, you'll see for sale signs everywhere. And
Right.
once I bought my house, I stopped seeing for sale signs. Or if someone's trying to get pregnant, I had a client who sees pregnant people everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I saw a pregnant person, but that's because there's a filtration system in our brain that
Right.
trains us to look for what we want to look for. And that's a cognitive bias. And so I love me a good woo. Like I'm a pretty woo person, but I've found that law of attraction stuff, if you're not getting into the toxic positive, like I could sit here and be like, I want $1 million. I want $1 million. That's not what
Right.
it's
That's
talking
different.
about.
That's the misuse of it.
Like anything, there's the
Right.
not healthy side. But all it is priming your brain to scan for what it wants. And scanning for solutions and not focusing on the problem doesn't mean you don't acknowledge the problem. In your language, I can ride a bike and not be like, there are no trees, nothing but path in front of me. It's like you can acknowledge the trees without staring at them.
Exactly. You can know they're there. That
Right.
kind of leans into the acceptance piece we were talking about before.
Exactly.
And so I have a client that was very stuck. Very, very stuck. Actually has probably been super stuck for a while on certain things. And a couple sessions ago, I had talked to her about body doubling, right? Which we could unpack what that is probably very quickly, but there's a little neuroscience behind it too. But it was interesting because she didn't realize that we didn't need to just sit and talk about how stuck she was and focus on the trees, so to speak. I said to her, I'm happy to do this with you. If you want to come in next session and you just want me to sit here and be present with you while you book this thing that you've been dragging your feet on, I can do that. And she looked at me kind of shocked, like, oh, you would do that in session with me? And I'm like, yeah, I've sat with people who have broken up with people before, honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
and so the most interesting thing happened though. I was expecting her to come in with her computer ready to go. She came into the next session a week later and she had gone home and done the thing.
Amazing. I love that.
So I am so curious what you think happened with that. Like, one, what is body doubling? Is there some science behind it? And two, why did that work?
Well, my short
Oh,
answer
balloons.
is you got balloons though in there. My short answer is I have no idea because I don't know her or what you did or the degree of your therapeutic alliance with her, but just guessing.
Yes.
It's like, well, body doubling is you just sit there and lend someone your nervous system so they can do a thing. I've sat on virtual sessions while people did laundry, while they cleaned their rooms, while they did their homework. And that can be useful because when you're with someone else, you've got two nervous systems and you've got mirror neurons happening. And as a therapist, if we're not tripped out by the task, then we're providing something for their system to orient to. Now,
Right.
why was she magically able to go do the thing? My hunch is, well, maybe she's been so bottled up in shame, which is then releasing cortisol, which is then causing more of a shutdown. Perhaps your presence then lifted some of that by showing her that you accept her, and that gave her enough wiggle room to come out of that dorsal shutdown nervous system state.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty good stab.
That's my best guess.
Right. Without knowing her. I also wondered if it kind of took the pressure off, like knowing, okay, I don't have to do this weekend. I've got, I'm going to go into my therapy session and do it. And so maybe taking the pressure off helped her just execute it. I don't know.
That sounds right.
But as far as like seeing this work for people where maybe, let me think of how to word this. Not necessarily how you would help a client, but ways that you've seen this work for yourself specifically, and ways that we may need to kind of change our thinking patterns to make stuckness work for us.
Do you
would
mean
that
body
look like?
doubling or just in general?
Just in general.
So the thing that no one tends to lead with or want to talk about are the secondary gains of being stuck, i.e., what are you getting out of being stuck? And I know when I'll use my drug addiction again, like, I'm not getting anything out of it. I want to stop. It's awful. And yes, I wanted to stop. And yes, it was awful. And all behavior is there for a reason. Again, you don't need to know why. A better question than why do I keep doing this to myself? A better question is, what am I getting from this? And don't say nothing. My clients know nothing is not an answer in my office. I have a bell that'll ding if you try to say I get nothing out of it. It's because it's not true. What did I get out of being a drug addict? I got to avoid all of my feelings. I got to avoid all my trauma. I got to be so busy with the pursuit of, the doing of the drugs, and then the recovering from the drugs, and then on that cycle, that I was able to avoid stuff I didn't want to deal with. Now, secondary gains doesn't mean it's good. It's not like these are health benefits, but we want to take the morality off the benefits and just look at, if we don't know what the job of the habit is, then how are we going to change it? Like, the job of procrastination is often fear of shame or fear of failure or fear of rejection or whatever. And if we can speak to the fear rather than the behavior, then you free up the entire chessboard to start moving.
I love that. And when you think about being able to use it in a way where you're kind of gaining insight, like you're saying, like you're understanding why it's existing, I cannot help but think of parts work that we started to talk about in the beginning. Is there any way that those play a role in this? And, maybe that's one thing I do like too about parts work. It's very powerful with a therapist, but it's also something that people can very much do for themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's what I love about it too. It's, like going to the gym. Having a trainer is awesome, but it's not like you need a trainer to go walk on a treadmill or whatever. And so I feel the same way as you. And with parts work, the part of me wants to do the bad thing and part of me wants to do the good thing. What I love about the framework of parts work is it takes away this whole the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. It's like, it's not that part of you wants to do a bad thing and part of you wants to do a good thing. Like, obviously drugs are bad, sobriety is good, but that doesn't get the job done. Let's assume that it's neither bad nor good. Let's just start with it's functional. The part of me that wants to do drugs thinks the best way to protect me is to numb me out. The part of me that wants me sober thinks the best way to protect me is to stay off drugs. They both have the same exact goal. And so this sounds wild, but it makes sense. If you look at the world of business negotiations and you start reading literature about how to do negotiations, it's the same skill set. If you're trying to negotiate with two opposing parties, you got to find a mutual goal. And then if you find a mutual goal, they stop fighting, they start getting curious, and then we can find, so obviously with a drug addiction, I'm not going to compromise and say, I can smoke meth on Tuesdays, but only on Tuesdays because I need to be sober except for my Tuesday meth day. That doesn't work. But negotiations have to start with finding what's our mutual interest. And if you can't do that, you're going to stay stuck.
What if, oh, wow. Okay. So I love parts work. I've been doing it for a while. And the way that I always saw it or explained it had a lot to do with, we can't change what we don't know. If you're in a therapy session and you come in and you're really, really upset and I remain curious and I remain present and I'm here and I don't feel flooded by you, I can learn and you feel safe and we keep working together. But if you come in and I decide I'm flooded and I go, oh, no, this is too much. You got to stop talking about this. They're going to leave, probably not come back and maybe report me, hopefully. And so that's one thing that always stood out to me was that it's easier to work with people who will stay present at the meeting. But I never really thought about how you just put it where, like, if you have a shared goal. Or if you all know what the shared goal is.
And that happens if we're going back to when you feel stuck with a client.
Yeah.
So if a client is presenting with a very dominant part who wants to spin and stay stuck and, not move in any direction, if my agenda as the therapist is movement, I've now created a polarization. Client's part is trying to protect them by keeping them stuck. As the therapist, if my goal is to move them, we are now at odds with each other. And so what I have to say to myself is, okay, I need to let go of my need to have progress so I can feel like a good therapist. I need to let go of my agenda and just be here without the agenda. And when I do that, often that client's stuck part settles down because both of us have the same agenda, which is just be with this person. And then you'll notice it feels differently somatically when I have an agenda versus when I don't.
What does it feel like to you, out of
When I have an
curiosity?
agenda, I
Yeah.
feel frustrated. I'll either get like irritated with what's happening, or I'll feel afraid that I'm not doing my job well enough, or I'll
Yeah.
just like want to be like, I got nothing for you. Like, you're talking in circles, we're going nowhere. I
Right.
obviously don't say this out loud, but
Internally.
when I have an agenda and I have enough wherewithal of my own parts that when I feel that happening, I'm tense. But there's physiology there. My client's system is going to respond to my tension, even if I'm saying everything's fine. We don't need to do anything, but sit here. If I have an agenda, it's going to show in the room. And so I tell my parts, hey, therapist parts, our job here is not actually to get a thing done. It's to be present with this person's system. The things will get done. They will. They might not get done right now, and that needs to be okay. And then you'll feel a spaciousness, and you'll feel a shift, and it will feel less threatening, and your client will respond to you when you get rid of the agenda.
I wonder if you could take what you just managed to do for a therapy setting and apply it to maybe a couple
Say more. I don't do
where
couples therapy. That's too much nervous system energy
oh
for
no,
me.
no, 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 not you as the therapist. Like you're in the couple. No,
Oh,
I totally agree. I'm not the biggest into doing couples work. I think because I'm highly sensitive, it's just like a lot to navigate. I love one-on-one. I love one-on-one. And I like groups if they're virtual. I know that's weird. It's almost like it's this kind of like,
no, makes sense.
yeah, like I'm in my space, you're in your space. But I'm curious if you could apply what you were just talking about to maybe a couple where partner A is really frustrated about a chronic issue that continues to come up and feel stuck in the relationship, and their partner is just not budging.
Yeah. That's the goal, right? Is to, what if I accept my partner where they're at and I let go of my agenda? But I'm a control freak and I don't want to do that. And it's like, but often, and I don't mess with couples therapy. It's an art. I am not skilled at it. I don't like it, but I have
Uh-huh.
mad respect for people who do it. If you are doing couples therapy or you're a person in a couple, paying attention to your own, because I can't control my partner's parts, but I can notice them. And I do, if I notice that one of my partner's vigilant parts is up, that's a really bad time to say, hey, honey, can we talk? And bring up a hard thing. So getting fluent in how your partner shows up will at least give you some cues to know now's not a really good time. If my partner comes home from work really upset because something bad happens, that's a really not good look for me to be like, why didn't you take out the trash? Like that's just never going to go well. So yeah, learning how to manage your own parts and your partner's parts, it's a lot of work, but it's worth
Yeah.
it. What's the
Yeah, for
alternative?
sure. Now am I right? You are writing a book about parts right now, or you
It is
have?
done. It'll be out May 13th, and it's all parts
Oh,
work. I'm
okay. So
so
what is
excited.
that? What is that one about?
Yeah, so it's called Align Your Mind. And I love IFS. I love Dr. Richard Schwartz. That work saved my life. And I love the
Yeah.
framework. And I wanted to go a little rogue and throw a few of my own spins on things. And I have
Which is great.
which is fun. And Dr. Schwartz was so generous and gave me a really beautiful endorsement. I was so scared to send it to him. My parts were like, you have taken this man's multi-decade body of work and you have bastardized it with your own stupid thoughts. And I'm like, here, Dr. Schwartz, this is my book. And he gave me a beautiful blurb.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
it's my take on parts work. It includes a lot of IFS. It includes some Gestalt and chair work kinds of things. But, I throw in my own theories and a few of my own frameworks in there. And I'm so excited to make parts work available, in every form. Everyone who's doing parts work in any form or format. I'm like,
Right.
yes, because parts work is the thing that moves the needle more than anything I've ever seen clinically.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of it, especially because once you know it, you kind of don't ever unknow it. Like it permeates everything from the way you have
Politics.
conflict, the way you have friendships, the way you make decisions, all of it gets impacted.
It's so true. And if you look at the political shenanigans, wherever you fall, you see people's parts are up. Very, very polarized. I'm going to double down and dig my heels in here. No, I'm going to do this over here on the opposite side.
Yep.
And everyone's parts are showing.
Oh, well, that sounds a little risque. So can I ask you, for for the sake of thinking about stuckness, which is where we started today, I want to make sure I'm following you first before I ask this question. Stuck is not necessarily the problem. Stuck is a message that causes problems.
Yes.
Right. And remaining curious, but without being stagnant about it. Like, we don't need to get fixated on understanding every single nook and cranny of the why, right? We can instead think of like, what are going to be these little microdoses of movement that are going to get me going? We get little like juiced up with dopamine, little hits. And it does, I mean, we didn't bring up failure schema, but this idea, this narrative of I'm going to do something, it's going to fail, starts to get rewritten with these little micro accomplishments, which I love your idea on that. So that's wonderful. And then also you talked a bit about like the biology of stuckness and, what can happen. So we know this now. We go out into the world, we think we got this. We're not going to get stuck anymore. And if we're stuck, it's okay. We're going to learn to deal with it.
Uh-huh.
But then life happens. We get super stressed, a trauma happens, someone has a baby, I don't know, just, all the stuff. What do you think are the most important, resilience patterns or practices or ways that someone can think or function that helps them not get back into that stuck pattern that they were in before, that they have gotten out of? And I say this with the kind of sub question. I've seen so many people break out of a stuckness and then stress puts them back into the groove. And then they feel like all my accomplishments, all my progress is gone.
Well, that all or nothing binary thinking is a part, right? So then my question for that is always, well, how true is that? Because we're not going to move if we're telling ourselves little tall tales, right?
Right.
This is why we can't have nice things. See, everything I do turns to crap. See, I knew that I would never make it, and so I will always be a failure. It's like, okay, well, that's great that your part is using binary thinking to protect you, but how true is that on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being it is immutable truth and 1 being it's total BS? Right. How true is it? And it might be true that a lot of your things don't work. It might be true that you're back on the cycle again regularly, but it's very seldom the case that it's always, everyone, every time.
Right.
And so for that, I would say we have to get out of your black and white thinking. But I think the thing that's missing in this whole conversation is grief. Like, we're in a culture where everything is about soothe the feeling, express it, be authentic, lead with your whole self, which I do not agree with. But where's grief in this? Because grief is not something that you can avoid as a human, and we suck as a culture. Right now, grief is really only allowed if you're talking about death, and then it's only a year before you're considered pathologically grieving. And so having a baby, you're going to need to grieve your body, your life, your sleep. Like, everything changes when you get a promotion. Likely you're going to have to grieve that some of your friends are jealous and you have to not be friends with them anymore. So all life shifts, even good ones. If you don't have a familiarity with the grieving process, you're going to get stuck real fast. And then you tell yourself a story about why you're stuck, which is then going to make you more stuck. So really, I think grief is the missing piece of all of our stuckness. And it'll help us. It's not fun. It doesn't feel good. But if you can grieve, you can move.
I'm relating and loving this because I remember when I lost my grandmother, who was like I idolized her. She's just like such an important person to me. And it was, I don't know, a day or two later, someone had said something like if I wanted a glass of wine when we were at like a meal or something. And I remember distinctly looking at them and being like, you know what? I'm not going to do that until I'm done feeling like shit.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've ever sworn on this podcast before, but here I am. And I think what it came down to for me is that like I purposely let myself get really almost purposefully stuck in it so that I could feel all the nooks and crannies of it, so I could like really feel it. And because I did that, I mean, it took me a couple months of feeling like that. And then I remember going on like a camping trip with my family, and we were sitting by the fire, and I laughed at something, and it felt like a genuine laugh, like I really felt it from my heart. And I just was like, oh, okay, that was it. And I'm not saying I don't grieve her anymore.
Of
I'm not saying I
course.
don't miss her, but the like intense
Yeah.
grief, it naturally moved.
Right. That's
Yeah.
amazing. And I wouldn't call what you did being stuck. It was sometimes when people say I'm feeling stuck, what
Yeah.
that means is I'm not feeling what I need to be feeling. And so I'm stuck. Like, stuck is actually not a feeling. Stuck is a situation. It's
Okay.
not a destination. Sometimes, not always, but like if you came to me and you're like, someone I loved very much died and I'm feeling really stuck, that might be because the grievy feelings haven't had any space to come up or be validated or witnessed or held or seen or all of
Yeah.
those things. You can't get to the nooks and crannies if your story is, I shouldn't be upset about this.
Right. Oh, okay. Okay. So I was grieving. I wasn't
Yes.
stuck.
No, not at all.
I'm so happy you brought that up because I think that is an interesting when I think back to my client that I was talking about who had made movement. She has talked about grief. She's brought grief up, and it hasn't been about death. It's been about the end of a marriage or the end of her youth or like different transitions that were out of her control. And so, gosh, that is super important. I had never really thought about the connection and the difference, really.
Right. And often what we call anxiety is grief. What we call fear of the future is grief. What we call I'm a control freak, okay, grief. So underneath most of our issues, so to
Yeah.
in quotes, if you did underneath trauma, underneath if you dig down far enough underneath most of our stuff, likely there's a tiny little box of grief that is very patiently waiting for our attention. And grief won't scream for it. It'll just sit there waiting. And then our
Yeah.
parts will go to very extreme lengths to keep us away from that little box of grief. And
Right.
that's too bad because grief sucks and it's medicine.
So that's your next book, right? I mean, honestly, you've heard it here, folks.
I need to
Navigating the
take a
box of
break.
grief.
The boxing, I don't love grieving. I
Yeah.
do love the work because I remember in my clinical internships and I worked at a grief and loss facility. And it was like, no one gives a crap who you are, what you make. Grief is like this equalizing force that strips all of our masks and puts
Totally.
us face to face with our humanity. And people were in connection with each other that would
Yeah.
never in a million years have even waved or smiled on the street. And it was really
Yeah.
beautiful.
Gosh, it really is such a universal thing that honestly we don't talk a lot
Ever.
about. Ever. It's even, I think about, I teach a counseling skills course in a master's program, and one of the sessions we're talking about different interventions for these mock sessions. It's really fun. We get to watch like each, I know it's like a fly on the wall. And then we all come back and we talk about how the sessions went. And I remember every session that came by, everyone had like, have you thought of this method and this method and this approach? And then there was a session that happened to center on grief, and it was like crickets. Like no one, everyone's like, so what is the best approach for grief? Like no one could actually grab what the most common, we all know EMDR, trauma, IFS, everything, like, but, but grief, it was hard. Like we couldn't just grab one out of thin air.
Which is amazing. I really like, because I don't like the 5 stages of grief as a grieving model because it was
Yeah.
written for people dying, not for people like
Living.
mourning.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross made this gorgeous model for people who were dying of cancer. But out of Harvard, Dr. William Worden has this 4 tasks of grief model that I really love because it's so human.
I'm writing
And
that
his
down.
4 tasks are: 1, accept that this happened and you can't change it. And that task, it's not linear. It's like, it's a task. And on some
Right.
days you can check that box, and on other days it's no, this hasn't happened. So task
Right.
1 is accept it happened. Task 2 is identify the feelings and feel them. That could take a minute. Task 3 is adjust your life to accommodate the new reality. So if you're divorced, your task 3 stuff might be find a place to live and figure out childcare and whatever. And then task 4 is how do you make meaning out of life now that this thing is not there? It's a really beautiful model.
Oh, I love that. And as you're saying it, I'm thinking of all these like theories and models that really support that.
Yeah.
That really aligns with.
Yeah.
Oh, that's gorgeous. I love that. What an unexpectedly beautiful turn the conversation took. I did not expect to end up on grief. I'm so happy you brought that up.
Yay,
Yes.
Woo.
When your next book comes out, I would love for you to come back and talk about it. And then when your third book on grief comes out, just saying. But so is there anything that we didn't touch on that you think is just something you really want people to meditate on or to remain mindful of if maybe they've been feeling stuck and that's why they clicked on this episode and they just wanted to walk away feeling like, okay, I've got somewhere to go?
Yes, I love that question. My thing is, what would happen if you started with the assumption that your brain was on your side? We walk around at odds. I'm terrified of my mind. I'm avoiding my thoughts. But like, what if you just started by assuming, what if my brain was on my side? What would change?
I love that. I love that because it's to speak of the whole bike ride from earlier.
Yes.
Right? You're not focusing on the trees. You're focusing on the path. And the path almost becomes like the place where your brain, I think the bike is the brain.
I love this metaphor so much. Yes. Nice callback.
Borrow it. Well, Britt, this was wonderful. I'm like so happy we got to talk. You are so brilliant in such a relatable way. And that's what I love about this. And that's really my goal for every one of these conversations is that people walk away feeling like they have ideas, but they also know that the person who's conveying it like really cares about what they're talking about. And I can absolutely feel that from you. So
Thank you, fully human.
Yes. Thank you so much. So for anyone who wants to find your books, your comedy, or get connected to you, as a therapist, if they happen to live in your state, where can they find you and learn more?
Yeah, so the new book, Align Your Mind, is available for pre-order everywhere you buy books.
Awesome.
You can find me on Instagram at Britt Frank or my website, brittfrank.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Britt, for coming. And I hope everyone enjoyed and finds some beautiful way to love your brain, get on a bike, and get unstuck.
Love it. Thanks for
having me.
Be well,
everyone.